And we're back after a little light hiatus and a fabulous vacation in DR. This is Poli-Side-Eye, my political show with my co-host, JC Tiger Fan. It's been a minute. I mean, there's always something to talk about politically, right?
Politics never sleeps, never.
Right. Before we get into our slightly controversial shake the table topic, let's get into what's going on currently. And what's standing out to me is voter suppression in Georgia. And then it looks like a couple other states are like following suit. And I'm just like, well, what can we do to stop this? Because clearly this sounds illegal to do, but they're making it legal.
Yeah, well, I don't know if illegal is the term I would use. Maybe unconstitutional is probably a more fitting term. And that might sound like I'm splitting hairs, but there is a distinction there. And honestly, what I think is going to happen is a lot of this is going to get played out in the courts, which plays into Republicans' hands, because if you remember what have Republicans been doing for the past 40 years, they've been stacking the courts. Mitch McConnell said that his chief task under the Trump administration was to essentially push through or ram through all of these judicial nominees in some of these like lower and like appellate courts. So that's been the Republican project since about the late 70s, early 80s. That's kind of been one of the main thrusts of the conservative movement. So I don't know if you can really hold your breath and hope that the courts will rule in favor of people who want to expand voting, because many of the people they've been selecting are hardcore right-wing people. So what's likely to happen is many of the lower courts will probably uphold some of these restrictions or these rollbacks, and it'll make its way up to the Supreme Court. Now, we know what happened with the Supreme Court, with RBG passing away and getting replaced with Amy Coney Barrett. Trump had 3 Supreme Court appointments in a 4-year term, which is crazy.
My God, you just reminded me of that. Oh, who were the 3?
It was Amy Coney Barrett, who they rushed through before Ginsburg's body was even in the soil. Brett Kavanaugh, who was embroiled in all of the scandal with the sexual assault and all of those things. And Neil Gorsuch, who they appointed. You remember after Mitch McConnell refused to give a hearing to Obama's last appointment? And that teed out for like the whole year. Okay, so as soon as Trump became president, that's who they appointed. Like literally the moment he took his hand off the Bible after getting inaugurated.
So who is the likely person to not be on there anymore? I'm trying to say that without saying, well, who's the next person that's going to die?
So some people have been speaking about Stephen Breyer, who was appointed by Clinton in the early 90s. He's, I want to say, like 82 or so. So some Democrats are kind of asking Biden to nudge him so that if he does decide to step down or if he passes away, at least we can replace him with someone who isn't. Essentially, Democrats don't want another situation where nobody steps down or there's no vacancy. And so if we end up with another Republican president, then we end up with a court with a 7-2 advantage. So nobody on the conservative side most of them are younger. So Neil Gorsuch I don't even think he's 55. Brett Kavanaugh is like 50. Amy Coney Barrett is like 45. So they're going to be on there for the next 30 or 40 years. So what's been interesting, i.e. strategic, is the Republicans have been appointing judges younger and younger and younger because these positions are for life. So even for some of the lower courts, they've been appointing justices who are like 35. So they'll be there for the next 60 years.
Speaking of that, they should change that to maybe like a 10-year term or something. Like, what would that take?
You change the terms of the Supreme Court?
Yeah.
I'm not a constitutional expert, but I want to say it would require a constitutional amendment because I believe that is etched in the Constitution. I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on that, and someone can feel free to correct me, but I'm pretty sure it would require that. Now, there have been some conversations about expanding the court, because that's not set in stone. Like that can be changed through congressional legislation. Like if you want to expand, and so that's when they call it court packing. So the court the numbers of the court that's been a debate throughout American history, but the actual term length is predetermined. And by predetermined, I mean, it can be changed, but the people are going to say, well, that's what the founding fathers wanted and all the other shit. So.
Like my last question on Georgia, it sounds like the voters are pretty much powerless at this point, and our messiah, Stacey Abrams, can't really do anything either about that. It looks like it's going to take a federal hand, i.e. Biden, doing something.
I mean, I don't know what that something might be. Again, I know he has, I believe I read the other day that he hasn't selected or appointed a solicitor general yet. So the solicitor general is along with the attorney general, are kind of the chief arbiters of the administration's judicial ideology, if you want to say that. So I'm sure they'll assess whatever options they have. But again, most of this is kind of beyond the scope of the executive and the legislative branch. It is really hard to expand the franchise. Many states make it so because it's much easier to take away voting rights than it is to expand them, which has been true throughout American history. We've had plenty of moments, especially post-Reconstruction, where essentially making it harder to vote was a key aim of especially the planter class in the South, but not exclusively. And so that has been something that has been true about the ruling class on the right, especially they don't want people to vote because they are at a numerical disadvantage. I mean, now they're clear about it. They say that you don't want people to vote because if everybody could vote, we never win another election. Like they're very obvious about this now. So right. I appreciate that these things are coming out into the open, but because before they had to try to paper over it with all of this talk about, oh, there's so much voter fraud and this and that, and dead people are trying to vote. And now they're just like, you know what? We just don't want Black people to vote because if Black people vote, we're not going to win. So, I mean, but that's good. Now people know, we always knew it implicitly, but now they are saying it out in the open. So I appreciate that. Not appreciate what they're doing, but appreciate them being candid.
You know, I feel like I'm in one of those movies where like they have to go back in time to fix things. But then when they go back to the present, something still happens to where everything still goes to shit regardless because it's just inevitable.
Well, I would say that William Faulkner once said that history is not was, it is. And what he meant by that is that there is really no such thing as the past. We're always living with the moment we're making now, it's all interconnected. So the notion that we have to go back in time or look like it's all constructed. And so while it might seem like some of these things are predetermined, like we have some degree of agency, we just have to figure out how to get out of this situation.
JC Tiger fan, ladies and gentlemen. So smart. Let's get into our main topic today, which is political opportunists, public intellectuals, and profiting off of social justice. Now, the reason why I chose this topic is because of the recent backlash of Tamika Mallory from the mom of Tamir Rice, trying to call her like, you know, she's profiting and I don't know, like putting her in the same category as that Shaun King character everyone hates.
I actually met Tamika Mallory about 6 or 7 years ago. So I used to, when I lived in New York, I was in the Urban League and I was also in the Urban League Young Professionals, which is like a subsidiary of the overarching Urban League organization. And so when we had like the Civil Rights Symposium and she was the keynote speaker and she was super nice. I look at figures like Tamika though, as she serves an emotional role for certain types of Black people. So I think the Black community, I think we need to really be a little bit more honest about what that means, because I think we throw that term out without really analyzing what that is. There's this one political scientist whose work I really appreciate. His name is Adolph Reed, and pretty much his work over the past 40 years has been about analyzing what we call like the Black community. And one point he always makes is that to speak about Black people as though we're a monolith, like he makes a good point. Like there are more Black people in America than there are Canadians, period. So that should just let you know, like this is a very large population of people. So to say that we all think the same, to say that we all want the same things, that we all have the same political beliefs, the same ideologies, it's ridiculous. Like we all have different experiences. Now, there are certain experiences of what some might say Blackness or being Black in America that we share. So I think that we all get annoyed by being in white environments. I think that could be true whether or not you're in school, at the workplace, or whatever. So I think, yeah, exactly. So I do think that there are some cultural similarities that we can all kind of, wink and nod and say, hey, I get this, like white people are annoying. I usually share this sentiment, so I get that. But when it comes to politics, I think we tend to conflate way too many things. And so with someone like Tamika Mallory, she is trying to essentially, and not just her, but also your Angela Rise and those sorts, like my mom used to always say the sweetest will gets the oil. What she meant by that is the person who's loudest is generally going to get the publicity in the spotlight. But by using that spotlight, they try to project this universal Black experience of frustration and disenchantment in these things. And they don't really talk about the fact that we are a very diverse, and I don't mean that diverse in the way that Microsoft likes to use diverse. I mean, we actually have different beliefs and ideas about what's going on and what we should be doing going forward. And so I think when we don't look at those nuances and those differences within the Black community, I think what it ends up does is frustrating people, because you have people like Tamika who are claiming, if they are not explicitly saying it, they're implicitly claiming to speak for all Black people. And I look at it, I'm just like, she don't speak for me. Like, I don't agree with what she said. Like, but that's what the downside or the huge limitation of the role of public intellectual. It's just like you're standing in for 38 million people and essentially saying that you have your pulse on what 38 million people think, which if you stop and think about that is utterly ridiculous.
But to ask a question, what does she say that you don't agree with?
Maybe agree is not the right word. I don't agree with the way that she goes about like articulating some of the things. And so some of the things that it just kind of, it's a truism. It's like when she did the Grammys thing and she's on this stage and talking about, Biden needs to recognize that, no justice, no peace. And it just kind of like, again, I think what she's trying to do, it's appealing to a certain emotional desire to hear these things. But for me, I'm kind of like, where's the analysis? Like, what's the political program that comes out of this? Like, okay, you got booked, you're in the Grammy stage. I'm sure you just have this book that's coming out. So I'm sure you're getting your advances. So you getting this publicity is helping you. But what is this doing for anybody else? And so I guess it's not necessarily the content that I could care less what she's saying, but it's more so like, well, what is the actual behavior doing for anybody aside from Tamika Mallory? But I'm just using Tamika, but you could replace Tamika and put Ava DuVernay, you can put Joy, whoever you want. Like anytime you assume the role of public intellectual or the racial spokesperson, I don't like that domain. And so I just think we need to not be so adamant about saying that we're speaking about the Black community, the experience of the Black community, because we don't all experience the same thing. And the naysayers will say, well, any of us could get shot by the police. Yes, this is true. Like, I'm not disputing that. But it's a truism. Like, it's not telling us anything. Also doesn't acknowledge the fact that while, yes, any of us could theoretically be shot by the police, but it doesn't acknowledge the fact that there are some Black people who are much, much, much more likely, because of their class position, because of where they reside, because of their educational status or whatever, are going to be much more likely to get shot by the police than Oprah. So I just like, sometimes like, I just think that in the desire to create this collective, we're all in this together, like we all are in the same boat, it smooths over the very real reality that in many ways we're not in the same boat. And I don't understand why acknowledging that is viewed as heretical or controversial. Like, it should be obvious, but
right. I was also going to say, like, people that I see on the front lines a lot that get a lot of national attention is like, D-Ray, with the blue vest, Sean King, which, are you able to explain why so many people have a problem with him?
I don't know if I'm suited to explain. I can hypothesize why.
Well, how about hypothesize? And I know a lot of people was putting into question, is he Black or not?
So I was going to say, I think part of it is the racial ambiguity, which, again, like, it's like the Rachel Dolezal effect. It's just kind of like, I don't understand why this pisses people off so much, but this whole like racial cosplaying is really bothersome to people. I remember I had gone to this party when I lived in New York, and this was right around the time that the whole Rachel Dolezal episode had happened. And I made a comment. I was like, she wants to be a Black woman. She can be a Black woman. And people like got so upset at me. And I was like, all right, well, I know going forward what I'm not going to say. I was saying it in jest, but for this gets really, to some people, this gets really, well, to a certain class of people. So I also think that certain Black people are going to be more annoyed by Shaun King than others. So I think the Black people who are most annoyed by Shaun King are like middle-class Blacks, educated Black people, professional class Black people. Maybe if I asked my mom what she thought about Shaun King, she'd be like, "Who's Shaun King?" Like I just think that there are certain Black people that just wouldn't care. But I think so. I think the racial ambiguity is one thing, and then I know there have been some instances of him doing fundraisers and all type of like crowdsourcing and things of that nature. And there's no clear paper trail as to where the money is being spent. So there are some questions of embezzlement and all other types of monetary miscues. And so I think that kind of, there's that too. I don't know all the ins and outs of that. I don't really care enough to really dive into it. But I think between the racial ambiguity and the where's the money going, I think those two things are, and then he's also very like cavalier, so I think that just makes it worse, because anytime he gets accused of some type of embezzlement or some type of like monetary issue, he clapbacks and essentially turns that into, oh, people are just ganging up in him and trying to stop the movement and all this other stuff. And so I think that just adds fuel to the fire, because he refuses to actually acknowledge many of these criticisms.
Because at one point there was some type of infighting. You had D-Ray versus Shaun King, and then you had Amanda Seales attacking Shaun King too. That was very publicized as well. I'm just like, well, let's look at the bigger picture. If he's doing something that's helping a family or pushing a positive agenda forward, can't we just overlook some things?
So I think that goes back to my earlier point about he doesn't articulate these things in this way. He makes it seem as though he is speaking for all Black people and doing something on behalf of this Black movement. If he just said, I'm raising money for this family in X place so that they can have money for school supplies and food, then I think people would be fine with that to some extent. I still think the race stuff would annoy people for whatever reason, but I think the issue arises when he's always trying to present himself as like, I'm doing the work for Black people, and I'm like, you ain't doing nothing for me. Like, I don't know which Black people, like, I don't, but yeah. So again, that goes back to my contention that this need to be a racial spokesperson or speak on behalf of all Black people is kind of, you put yourself in a position to be critiqued, because people are going to say, well, you're not speaking for me. And so it feels like people want to retrieve the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s and make it seem like we have this big thing going on. But even that is a Disneyfication of history, because even within the civil rights movement, it's easy to look back on history and think that there was this grand strategy that was being unfurled, but that was not as clean and as clear cut as people understand. Like, every social movement, every political development is going to have moments where people disagree. Like, we disagree both on tactics, we disagree on ideology, we disagree on what policies to actually pursue. All of these things are always going to be ongoing. And so even to look back on that era and say, well, look, they were all in this together, I'm just like, but they were. I mean, they were all trying to achieve some form of Black freedom, but that Black freedom struggle looked different to people involved. Some people just wanted a slice of the capitalist pie. Some people were more socialist. Some people wanted a more democratic socialist. So I mean, I just think that there is a way that we try to project this unified front that doesn't actually speak to the fact that we are, like everybody else in the world, a varied group of people who have different interests, different backgrounds, different ideas of what we want, and so on. And so I don't know why we could acknowledge that and also understand that we also have some cultural connectivity. Like, I think that's like, we can do both. We can talk about the cultural aspect of the cultural dimension, and also acknowledge that politically we just differ. Like, we're not in the same team when it comes to some political stuff. Like, I don't understand why that's so difficult for people to do.
Well, I'm going to get back to like maybe individuals that you could comment on, and then I'll ask like the bigger picture questions. So I also seen that, like, Kendrick Sampson from Insecure, he is now like risen to like a point where he's on the front lines a lot. And he uses his thirst traps now to really put down these like soliloquies about Black thought and like progression. And I'm like, that's a great way to use your thirst trap. I appreciate that. But he was on the Grammy performance too, right?
He was the one who had gotten
shot. But yeah, I think he's doing some positive things, what he can do. He's an activist.
Is that what he calls himself?
No, but that's not.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to throw up right now if that was an actual term.
Well, no, but I think he's doing some good work, even though I'm pretty sure you can probably spin it in some type of cynical way.
So I wasn't going to say cynical, but I was going to say that I'm also somewhat leery of the term activist because it doesn't tell us what you are agitating in favor of. And the response to that would be like, well, I want rights for Black people. And I'm just kind of like, well, again, all Black people don't want the same things and we all don't experience the same things and have the same needs. So what are you agitating for? We don't really talk about what people's overarching ideologies are. How do they want the world to be structured? Like, that's important to know. Even though many people won't say it, I know for a fact that Ava DuVernay and I do not share the same ideology. Now, Kendrick Sampson, that's his name?
Kendrick Sampson, yeah.
Okay. I don't know what his ideology is because I don't browse his Instagram. I don't know. Is he anti-capitalist? I don't know these things. Like, these things are important because I want to know if you are an activist and claim to speak or claim to represent the Black struggle. I want to know, well, what is your position on these things? Like, when you ask those questions, people are just like, but they're doing good work. And I'm just like, well, that's not really the question. The question isn't about good work for whom and like, what is the aim of the work? I think that's a legitimate question. And I think you can do both. I think you can say that, oh, I appreciate that so-and-so or Kendrick or whomever is engaged in whatever type of political engagement he's doing, but I don't know if this is the type of work that I want to support or align myself with. And so, again, I don't want to make it sound like I'm disparaging people because do what they want. But I do think that there is this inclination to speak for other people that I really don't like. The notion of representation in and of itself is, and we can talk about this in another episode, is super problematic. So I think whenever you say you claim to represent or to speak for somebody or a group of people, I will automatically come into it with skepticism. I just will. It's inadvertent at this point.
Okay. I mean, I really wanted to roast Van Jones for just maybe 2 minutes.
No, that's a whole different. I mean, he's just straight up just out here for the bag. Like, all that crying and shit, like, what can you say about him? Like, he did that little special with Meghan McCain talking about, oh, we just need to get along and that's what America needs. He's obviously just here for a check. Like, at this point, it's just so clear. Like, I don't know how you could not look at Van Jones and not see an opportunist. Like, you have to be trying not to see it at this point because he is putting it in your face. Like, I remember the very first time that Trump gave his State of the Union address. I don't watch CNN because I just think it's terrible. But someone had circulated a link of him talking about doing expert reactions to Trump's State of the Union, and Van Jones is on this panel saying he just looks so presidential. Like, we saw in that moment that once he got behind that mantle, he became the president. I'm just like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, it's just so, and then like 2 weeks later, Trump did something racist, and then he was talking about how Trump was like the biggest threat to Black people. And I'm just like, okay, but then 2 weeks ago, you said that he was presidential. Like, what is the truth? Like, which one is it?
I think when we think of political opportunists, I think he is blatant opportunist, and maybe some other people may be a little bit more subtle.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I mean, but the thing about him is he tries to act like he's not. And just kind of like, if you would just embrace that you just out here for the bag, like, people could move on. But it's the fact that you were trying to present yourself as something that you're absolutely not, that just pisses people off.
And lastly, I don't think I have a problem with Al Sharpton. I mean, like, I enjoy his political views sometimes on MSNBC. I almost get a good laugh out of him, too.
And what does that say about him? I'm just saying. But
I think he's doing some good work, you know. I think before he transitioned to TV, I think he was out there, you know, on the front lines.
so I remember when he had this march in Washington to capstone, I guess if you want to say that, everything that had been going on over the summer. And I remember seeing one of the flyers for that event, and it was the March on Washington sponsored by JP Morgan, T-Mobile, Shell, like all these other corporations. And I'm just kind of like, if a corporation is that amenable to your movement, it makes me then wonder, okay, well, who is this benefiting? Like, why is it that Shell or T-Mobile or Capital One or whoever, I don't remember who the sponsors were, but they were huge conglomerates. Why are they so okay with this? To me, a good transformative social movement should be necessarily antagonistic to corporations. Like the fact that Amazon and Walmart and all these other places can throw and plaster Black Lives Matter and support Black women and racial wealth gap and race this, race that, equality and everything else on their websites, and no one even like bats an eye, it's deeply problematic. It's not like, and so I think Al Sharpton is interesting because he comes from an era of where Black politics is kind of in crisis in a sense. So after I don't usually like the term civil rights movement, but I'm just going to use it because it's the kind of the normal parlance. But in the late 60s and 70s into the 80s, there were a number of, I guess, Black leaders who weren't necessarily, again, like it was a situation where a good number of Black people just wanted to integrate the middle class and kind of the upper strata. And then what ends up happening is that you start getting more and more class cleavages. There was also a lot of issues with gender and sexual orientation, and especially around like the AIDS crisis. So Kathy Cohen's a political scientist who's written a lot about how there were a lot of cleavages within the Black church, which has historically been one of the foremost institution in pushing for or helping mobilize around Black political struggle. And many of these institutions didn't acknowledge the fact that AIDS is ravaging so many Black people, especially Black queer people. And so I think in this era, you kind of started to see that, oh, wow, we really can't really put up this unified front in a sense because we have a number of issues that we're not acknowledging and everyone is not experiencing the same things. And so Al Sharpton comes out of that era of Black political leaders, and I think in a lot of ways he still operates like that. It's like he's stuck in 1982. I mean, I'm ultimately pretty agnostic towards Al Sharpton. Like he decided to go and secure his bag with MSNBC. Like it is what it is. I don't want to make it sound like I'm salty or mad about it because you do what you do. I just get annoyed when people try to say that they are speaking for all Black people because I'm just like, you can't do that. Like we're not all the same.
Mm-hmm. I know that you talked about Tamika Mallory already, but did you think that Tamir Rice's mom had a point? Or do you think she was justified in calling her out?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I can't imagine what she's going through, but I could only wonder what it's like to always see somebody invoking your slain child and you're not getting anything from this. Again, it goes back to my original question, like who's benefiting from this work? And so I think the fact that she's interrogating that, like I haven't, like these people are on TV and newspapers and the internet and all these other things talking about Black Lives Matter, my child, this, that, and the other, but I haven't seen the fruits of this. Like who is this for? Really what it is the commodification of Black pain. Like that's what in a way, that's what it is. But again, we kind of live in, and we've talked about this in the show before, we live in an era where everything is relentless need to commodify everything. Everything is about a brand or a platform.
When you spoke of commodification, it made me think of, you remember like Brianna Khan, you probably didn't hear about it.
No.
Yeah, I just sent you the photo, and then it says Brianna Khan, Days of Action, and a BBQ.
Oh God! All right, I'm done. I'm done. I'm just done. Because really, Brianna Khan? No, I did not see this, but this is wow. This is pretty
like such a backlash on Twitter.
You know, I'd be under a rock a lot of the times, but I didn't see this. I'm glad I didn't see it though, because I would have threw up all over myself.
Well, I'm guessing that's what you mean when you say like commodification, I guess.
Yeah. My question is, who is this for? Who is this for?
So if you are doing social justice actions, should one be able to receive money in some particular way can they profit?
Who's paying you?
I mean, I'm guessing being paid to speak.
Okay, but
or writing a book.
So corporate payment. So I'm like, I think it's important, like, who's paying you to do these things? Because this is, if you are giving a speech at Goldman Sachs to speak about.
Say if you want to give a speech at a college, at a university. Like that, like being paid to speak.
What I would say is, I would say that I'm speaking as me. I'm not speaking for anybody. I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody. I'm speaking, you are paying me to give my opinions about me and my stuff. Like, I think it becomes unethical when you're doing this and are claiming to do this on behalf of a movement or on behalf of some type of broader struggle. Like, that is a problem to me. And so if whoever wants to say that, oh, I want to get paid, I mean, I wouldn't do it, but if you want to say that, oh, I want to get paid, $2,000, whatever it is, to give this 30-minute, 1-hour keynote about X policy or X event or whatever, like, do what you want, but don't say that you're doing this on behalf of Black people. Don't say you're doing this for the movement or doing this for the struggle or, doing this for the people. Like, no, you're doing it for yourself. One thing that MLK never did was the only, he and Coretta often used to get into it because he would not accept these payments. And at some point she was like, we need a bigger house because we have all these kids now. Like, we need some type of income. That's not to say that everyone has to adhere to that model, I think. But again, the question is, who is benefiting from that? Like, if you are claiming to be doing something on behalf of other people, that gets into a really, really hairy kind of domain. And I don't know. I think there's some ethical questions about that.
That's the theme of the episode. Who is benefiting from this?
I would feel so much better if people would just say, look, I'm just doing this because I want to get paid. I want to secure the bag. The money is there, and just be honest about that. Like, don't try to make it seem like you're just doing this out of like altruistic reasons.
And just to give a disclaimer, y'all, we are not saying the people that we mentioned are doing this for profit.
Yeah, I don't know anything about these people. I'm just saying
we don't know are. Well, some of them, but.
Well, I know for a fact some of them are getting paid because I've worked with some of them. Some of them have very exorbitant speaking fees and things of that nature. I won't put any names out there because I just won't do that. But I do know that there are speaking fees often associated with people who are so-called social justice warriors or activists.
Okay. And finally, who do you think is actually doing the work? Who do you approve?
I knew you were going to ask this question. So I would say that I don't want to name a singular person, and here's why. Because I know that there are tons of people out there, probably Black women, probably working Black women, who are doing so much work and are not being acknowledged. And what I don't want to do is to elevate a singular individual, because the Black freedom struggle, Black politics has never been about individuals, or it shouldn't be about individuals. Even when we talk about the civil rights movement, we think about it being led by MLK and Malcolm X and Rosa Parks, all these other, and obviously they did great things, but many of them will be the first to acknowledge that none of these movements would have happened had it not been for people on the ground agitating, persisting that they get rights and that they fight for what was theirs. And so I don't want to just say one person, because I know that there are a lot of people who are on the ground, probably everywhere, who are doing great work. And so I would rather not say one person and say that we don't need a superhero. We don't need to put somebody under the spotlight. Like, I think we should just acknowledge that I don't like this savior complex, this way that we turn people into celebrities. Like, I don't like that. And so I'm going to push back and give this very diplomatic answer in not answering your question directly.
Fair question. Very diplomatic. Very, very diplomatic. You really should get into politics. I don't know why. But I think we've reached the end of our episode, y'all. I'm pretty sure y'all had a lot to say in the comments.
Yeah, I hope I pissed somebody off. I really don't. I just try to offer a nuanced perspective. That's what I try to do.
Right. We are offering nuanced perspectives and for you to look a little deeper at things. This is Poli-Side-Eye, which is, political cynics. Well,
I'm optimistic. Well, hopeful, not optimistic, hopeful.
With that, what is your book recommendation?
Yes. So the book that is the perfect companion to this episode is called The Black Bourgeoisie by E. Franklin Frazier. So Franklin Frazier was a sociologist he started writing in like the late 30s, early 40s, wrote through much of the mid 20th century, but this book came out in 1957 and it was super controversial because it came out right in the thick of the civil rights movement. In the book, it's essentially he just drags middle-class Black America. So he says that they're living in the land of make-believe and that what they view as political struggle isn't political struggle, and they're just trying to incorporate themselves into the white elite class. But what they don't understand is that the white elite class doesn't want them. So now they have like this crisis of identity. And he essentially says they're just a big barrier to Black progress. But it's a sociological text. So he brings data, he interprets behavior. It is very interesting. I read this book a couple years ago and I was like, this still feels relevant today. He drags the talents intent and all of these other things. And so absolutely read The Black Bourgeoisie.
It sounds very interesting.
It's pretty short too. I think it's less than 200 pages. It's a pretty short, pretty easy read too.
Okay. And y'all, if y'all want to find out about it, it's in the description below. Now you can tell them where they can follow you as always.
Yes, so I can be found on Twitter or on Instagram at JAYC_TigerFan.
Yeah, y'all can follow me, of course, CDIGGI1 on Twitter and Instagram. Make sure y'all like, comment, and subscribe, and most importantly, share. And we will see you for the next topic. All righty. Bye.